Merry Christmas, 2021. Well, I thought I'd go into the situation today on a couple issues here. One piece of good news for Christmas, I understand that the James Webb Space Telescope has finally, at long last, been launched, and the early report I saw on the on the iPhone news there, so to speak, was that it was a successful launch. However, of course, there's a lot to go before we can really declare the whole thing to be a success, and that we'll just have to continue to monitor that and hope for the best. And so that's one little good piece of Christmas news. Um, on the other hand, I want to go into another issue here, which is perhaps not as good news, which was the decision Thursday of the jury in the Kim Potter case to convict her of first-degree manslaughter. And I think that and the shooting, death of the motorist there. And my thinking is that this seems to me to be a really messed up verdict, in my opinion. Um, you know, basically, what we're dealing with here is that you have a person who was stopped at a traffic stop, who jumped back into a car and tried to drive away with a police officer kind of hanging on the car there, and in the confusion, this officer Kim Potter, a 26-year veteran, uh, uh, um, ended up shooting him with her gun rather than using a taser, which she'd indicated that she was planning on doing beforehand. And this is on of course, the body cam stuff. Um, so um, the thing about this is that there have been other cases of this sort, kind of rare instances, that of course what we're really dealing with in truth, which I'm not sure, I didn't really follow the trial in detail, but I do know that it's pretty clear cut. You're dealing with an issue of muscle memory and psychological reactions on the one hand, and conscious perception of what's happening on the other hand, basically here. I mean, an accident like this, given the nature of the Glock versus the taser and the way that they would feel in your hand and so forth. But the fact is, under extreme stress condition, which this was done in, a lot of this stuff doesn't really get to the conscious mind. And so, and I think this is another symptom of that Hanson County jury pool up there. This is a very liberal county, very left wing. I mean, and over in Minneapolis side, 44% of the people actually voted to eliminate the police department. I mean, and replace it with some other kind of touchy-feely thing. This is the kind of crazy that you have going on. The defund the police folks may be in retreat, but they haven't totally surrendered yet, obviously. So obviously the issue was a tragic case that happened. But the only way it seems to me where you really get into this is that it represents probably, my guess is that subconsciously she was thinking one thing and consciously thinking another. That's the fact that she actually drew the firearm probably indicates that at some point instinctively she saw this as a situation where the use of lethal force was appropriate, and then instant later consciously thought the taser would be the more appropriate thing, which is called intermediate level of force, which is considered somewhat parallel to the use of the police baton. Okay. And so I think that's essentially what went wrong here. It's a tragic incident, and I understand that the use of force expert in the case actually testified that use of lethal force would have been appropriate given the risk to her fellow officer, that the movement that the suspect was engaged in. But this indicates also, I think, the kind of the nature of the jury in that area. And of course, I think that they're going to get the kind of, how would you say, the police force they deserve up there. And by the way, if you like these videos, please subscribe, give me a like, and any comments would be appreciated. Kind of a sour message for Christmas Day, I guess, but nonetheless, it's kind of what's been on my mind for a day or so here, is just kind of my reaction to this whole fiasco. And of course, now we get another thing that gets to me is that given the definitions of the charges, I think it was totally an inappropriate charge. in other words, the second degree manslaughter is defined as culpable negligence, which is worse than just being negligent. And I think applying that into a high stress situation like that with a fleeing suspect and a fellow officer's life at risk, I think is very dubious. In the first degree, which she actually is convicted of, part of the way they do it in Minnesota is they just stack the two charges and you convict them of both. And the idea of it basically is that the lesser included charges there, so that if an appellate court were to overturn the first degree charge, then it would just fall back that she's been convicted on the second degree charge, and they'd be resentenced on that. That's what they're doing there with that. At first, it sounded kind of flaky when I heard about this in the Chauvin case, but that's what it really is. But essentially, so, but the first degree apparently was based on the idea that there was a misdemeanor guilt attributed also, which somehow upped the charge all the way to first degree. And the misdemeanor apparently was careless handling of a firearm, which I don't really see that at all. It looks to me like her handling of the firearm was totally appropriate if she was going to shoot somebody. I mean, it wasn't like she's carelessly handling a firearm and it accidentally went off. Definitely it didn't go off accidentally, so I don't really quite see that charge. But at any rate, this jury, I think, has its nose up as well. At any rate, I always get a little upset with this thing. The jury system is touted as being so great. I don't really think it is. I've always been critical of the jury system. Of course, I'm also critical of judges. And I really don't have a specific answer of what would be a better system either. That's another point. But I do point out that if you put 12 people in there, this is supposed to give some guarantee. But usually people in groups like this tend to kind of go along with the crowd eventually. Unless you're an independent thinker like myself, you probably aren't going to do that. You're probably just going to eventually cave in, which is what obviously happened. For instance, the guilty verdict in the second degree manslaughter was actually signed on the 21st, and the first degree came down only on the 23rd. So on the 21st, they also claimed they couldn't come to an agreement. So it seems like when the judge sent them back again, eventually the people who were holding out caved pretty much immediately on second degree. And then apparently we're hoping they would get out of this mess and not have to find them on the first degree, and only to find out that the hardliners on there apparently weren't quite satisfied yet, and they had another 2 days of fun. So I got I watching some stuff on this. Watching the Watchers YouTube video, which if you want to get more detail on this, you could go to that. That's a recent video he's got. But I guess I could put a link to that below. But I'll give you a quick synopsis of some of the issues I found relevant in it anyhow. The one thing that nobody really has discussed yet, which is where I think if you're really going to go for a charge in this case, is to go down to a lower degree, probably it's third. I don't know the exact law up there, but basically pure involuntary manslaughter without culpable negligence. Just basically a careless accident, if you will, or something. And I think that would have been a much more appropriate level if you're going to charge her for this at all. I'm not necessarily for charging her for this because, first of all, she's been fired from her job as a police officer. She's not going to ever work as a police officer again. There's no chance that this will be replicated. And I think that's the first thing that would be sound to be a response to a mistake of this order of magnitude. And there's obviously no intent to do wrong, I don't think, here. This is and I think that any negligence was actually generated by the suspect who was trying to drive away, putting another officer's life at risk. This guy was in trouble before, by the way, and of course that information was not presented to the jury either, which I'm not sure that's appropriate. I know that the opposite's true, that the previous criminal convictions of the defendant don't come into the jury because basically they want the jury to be able to objectively look at, did they commit this specific crime based on the facts in that specific case. But when you look at the issue of what the intentions of the victim, the person that was shot in this case, I think is it's pretty clear cut they were dealing with a dangerous person, and there's plenty of reason to believe he really was dangerous and that their judgment was right. But at any rate, um, so anyway, that's kind of my opinion on that. It looks like, on a sentence point of view, she's looking at something like a typical 86 months on their sentencing guidelines for that. There are mitigating factors that could drag it down significantly, and then there's enhancing factors that the prosecution's trying to pose, which would increase it. And it's hard to know what the judge is going to do in this case, although this is a judge that's in a very liberal district, so we'll see what happens in February on the sentencing. In the meantime, she's spending Christmas Day in jail, and that sounds like, well, very sad thing. And I think particularly in this case, it's kind of sad all around, although, this is, to me, that this is almost enhancing the criminal elements, a feeling of feeling that they can do whatever they want, and that the system will support them rather than support the police. At any rate, that's my opinion. I don't see this as being an extremely negligent case. I mean, there really was serious risk there in the case, and in fact, we've had a lot. I have a friend that's very, very critical of tasers, and I'm not sure what I think about the subject. It is an intermediate level of force, but you should understand that the taser, again, is not a substitute for a firearm. The taser is a substitute for a police baton or maybe mace. Okay, so that's the difference in the two situations. And I'm not sure dealing with a person trying to drive away a car whether a taser is the correct tool anyhow, because the person might freeze up with their foot on the gas pedal and crash the car if they're being effectively tased. But you could argue that, but that's why I said the use of force expert in the case, as I understand, testified that lethal force would have been legitimate legally. But the jury was not in the mood for that. They're still in this defund the police attitude, I guess. And these things are always serious on both sides when you get into traffic stops. And probably what I would suggest for police in that area is just don't do traffic stops. I mean, is it really worth it? Okay, the person's speeding. They don't get to collect a speeding ticket. When they crash, you can deal with them then, right? I mean, I'm being a little flippant here, but I mean, when you look at the situation, if they're risking actually going to prison, and I think going to prison as a police officer or ex-police officer is a lot more serious than let's say a criminal element type individual going to prison, where they're more or less in with their own types of people. I mean, you're obviously marked as a target if you're going in as a cop. So, but anyhow, I'll wrap this up for now and try to leave us with a little bit of Christmas cheer, right? But anyhow, I just had to kind of get that off my chest. That's what I think about the subject. So at any rate, like I say, I'll put a link to the Robert Ruler discussion of that in the description below, as well as my social media links, and or at least the account names. And you can. I hope you all have a Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year. And until next time, all for now.